from my wife. Get out of here.
Pay attention to the man with a gun on his hand running towards the woman. His name is Matthew Molicone, the husband to the same woman the handgun was pointed at. Also, pay attention to the woman who is seen begging. Her name was Kimberly Molicone, a mother and a wife. In this footage, she was seen begging her husband to stop, not knowing that this will be her final moment. This is the story of Matthew Molicone, his wife Kimberly, and Molicone, her secret lover Danny, and how Matt killed his wife in a shootout with the lover. It was a little after 9 o'clock on the night of July 12, 2022, when the first 911 call came in from a quiet neighborhood in Ray Township, Michigan. The dispatcher's headset crackled with panic. A trembling voice shouted over the line, "There's shooting! Someone's shooting their house." Within moments, the calls multiplied. Different voices, different angles, the same chaos. Gunfire had erupted on a peaceful street where families usually fell asleep to the hum of crickets and the faint buzz of porch lights. But that night, it sounded like a war zone. And at the center of it all, a husband, a wife, and the man who had once been her secret. When deputies arrived, headlights flashed across a lawn scattered with shell casings. A white SUV stood idling, its windows shattered. A man lay wounded on the ground near the house, clutching his leg, and another man, his hands trembling, was being restrained by officers, sobbing uncontrollably. Inside the SUV, a woman was slumped against the seat. She wasn't moving. Her name was Kimberly Molicone, a mother, a wife, and by dawn, she would be pronounced dead from a single gunshot wound to the neck. What began as a night of confrontation would end with two families torn apart, a community left reeling, and investigators racing to answer a single haunting question. Who pulled the trigger first? To understand how that night spiraled into tragedy, we have to go back years before the gunfire, to a complicated marriage, a buried affair, and a man who couldn't let go. Matt Molicone met Kimberly when they were both young, full of promise, and chasing ordinary dreams. Together, they built a life, a home, children, stability. But beneath the surface, their relationship had started to fracture long before that July night. By 2022, their marriage was strained, burdened by trust issues, rumors, and whispers of infidelity. Matt later told investigators that he had discovered an affair years earlier between Kim and another man named Danny, a neighbor and longtime acquaintance. According to Matt, it wasn't a new revelation. It was a wound that had healed poorly, scarring over without ever truly closing. He said he'd learned of the affair around 6.5 years before the shooting, but that the betrayal had resurfaced just 45 days before Kim's death. He described it as if it had happened yesterday. "I found out she was seeing him again," he said. "It was like I'd been living a lie all over again." To friends and relatives, the tension between Matt and Kim was no secret. There were arguments that spilled into the open, long stretches of silence between them, and what some described as a coldness that never quite went away. Still, from the outside, they looked like a couple trying to hold it together, at least for their kids. And then there was Danny, the other man in this triangle. Danny had known Kim for years. He claimed their relationship had ended 2 years prior to the shooting, insisting he had moved on and was trying to live quietly. But others believed their connection had never really stopped. Text messages, casual meetups, and shared friends hinted that the spark between them might have still been alive, just hidden, waiting for the wrong moment to reignite. That wrong moment came in July 2022. It started with a get-together at Danny's house, a small social gathering among friends and neighbors. According to witnesses, Kim was there, along with several others, including Danny's family and a few acquaintances. There was drinking, laughter, music, the kind of night that feels harmless until everything shifts. Kim's friend Lori later told investigators that Kim had relapsed into using drugs that night. She said Kim was upset, fragile, and fearful. According to Lori, Kim had confided something chilling. "Matt's going to kill me tonight." Whether that was a figure of speech or a genuine premonition, no one could have known. But in hindsight, those words would hang heavy over everything that followed. As the night went on, Matt's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He had reportedly been drinking earlier and had gotten into arguments with Kim in the days leading up to that evening. Some say he showed up at Danny's property uninvited. Others claim Kim went there willingly, hoping to collect her belongings and finally cut ties. But one thing was certain. The moment Matt's vehicle rolled up that driveway, the uneasy calm of the night shattered. He would later tell police he only came to talk, to finally end things and move forward. But in truth, his emotions were already burning. A mixture of jealousy, rage, and desperation that had been building for years. When investigators pieced together the timeline, they discovered that the confrontation that night had lasted mere minutes. A blur of shouting, movement, and gunfire. And by the time the echoes faded, Kim was dead, Danny was bleeding, and Matt's entire life had come undone. But at that point, no one knew who was to blame. Each man would tell a different story, and in those early hours, detectives faced a mystery clouded by chaos, emotion, and lies. What exactly happened that night on that quiet Michigan street? And who really fired first? That's where the story turns from tragedy to investigation. When deputies later reconstructed the final minutes before the shooting, they described it as pure chaos contained in seconds. Everything that had been building for years, suspicion, betrayal, anger, fear, all erupted in the space between a few breaths. It began just before 9 p.m. According to several witnesses, Matthew Molicone arrived at Danny's property in his white Chevrolet SUV. Inside the vehicle was his wife, Kimberly, who appeared visibly anxious, and in the passenger seat beside her, a duffel bag. What was inside that bag would later become crucial evidence. A firearm registered in Matthew's name. Some say Kim didn't want to go there that night, that she begged him not to drive over, that she wanted to avoid yet another confrontation. But Matt insisted. He told her they were going to end this once and for all. Whether that meant closure or something far darker, only he knew. As they pulled into the long driveway of Danny's home, the last of the summer daylight was fading. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices almost immediately. One described the sound as a man screaming, like he'd lost control. Another thought it was just another domestic argument, unpleasant but not uncommon. Then, in the distance, came the unmistakable sound of gunfire. From here, accounts differ. Danny claimed that Matt had shown up furious, accusing him of continuing the affair with Kim. He said that Matt began shouting, pacing, and at one point pulled out a gun, threatening both of them. Matt's version of events was starkly different. He told investigators that Danny was the aggressor, that he fired first, forcing Matt to return fire in self-defense. He said Kim was caught in the crossfire, struck by a bullet that was never meant for her. But when detectives examined the evidence, that story began to fall apart. The forensics told a tale of their own. Bullets were recovered from multiple angles, some lodged in vehicles, others scattered across the gravel driveway. Kim's wound indicated a single gunshot fired at close range, entering through her neck and severing a major artery. She wouldn't have survived more than a minute or two. What haunted investigators most was the position of her body. Seated in the passenger seat of the SUV, seatbelt still fastened, hands empty. She hadn't been fighting. She hadn't even been standing. It looked as if she'd never had a chance to defend herself. Witnesses nearby described hearing a man screaming after the gunfire stopped, "Oh my God! Kim! No! Kim!" followed by the sound of metal scraping gravel, as if someone had collapsed beside the car. When police arrived, they found Matt on the ground, crying hysterically. He kept repeating the same words. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." Deputies from the Macomb County Sheriff's Office secured the area within minutes. They found Danny lying near a tree line, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the leg. He was in shock but conscious enough to tell officers. He shot her. He shot Kim. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where he would later survive. Inside the SUV, Kim was motionless. Paramedics tried to perform CPR, but it was no use. The wound had been instantly fatal. A single bullet, fired through the open driver's window, had struck her as she turned her head toward Matt. She died before the first responder could even unbuckle her seatbelt. The weapon, a black handgun, was found on the ground near the front of the vehicle. It had been fired multiple times, and the magazine was nearly empty. Officers described the scene as one of the most emotionally charged they had ever encountered. A husband crying over his wife's body, the alleged lover bleeding on the ground, neighbors standing in disbelief. What had begun as a confrontation over infidelity had ended as a crime scene. In the days that followed, Ray Township felt suspended in disbelief. The sound of sirens had faded, but the echo of what happened that night lingered through the quiet rural streets. A haunting reminder that violence can surface anywhere, even in the calmest corners of Michigan. Inside the Macomb County Sheriff's Office, detectives were piecing together every fragment of the case. They had a dead wife, a wounded man, and a husband whose story didn't align with the evidence. Now, they needed to know why. Detective Sergeant Chris Elias, a seasoned investigator known for his calm but unrelenting style, was assigned to interview Matthew. The footage from that room would later be played in court, and it was as haunting as it was revealing. At first, Matt appeared composed, though visibly shaken. He answered questions directly, his tone subdued. He described the confrontation, the argument, the gun going off accidentally. But when detectives pressed on the details, his composure began to slip. Elias asked, "Matt, if this was an accident, why bring a loaded weapon?" Matt hesitated, staring at the table. "I just wanted to scare him," he said softly. "Make him stop talking to my wife." "Was Kim afraid of you?" Elias asked next. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he whispered, "She didn't have to be." For detectives, that silence said more than words. As the interrogation went on, it became clear that the shooting was not a spur-of-the-moment act. It was the culmination of months of tension, jealousy, mistrust, and emotional volatility that had been spiraling long before that night. When investigators retrieved Matthew's phone, they found text messages between him and Kim that painted a deeply troubled picture of their marriage. Arguments over trust, accusations of cheating, pleading apologies that went unanswered. In one message, sent just days before the shooting, Matt wrote, "If I can't fix this, I don't know what I'll do." To prosecutors, that line read like a premonition. The Michigan State Police Crime Lab was brought in to reconstruct the trajectory of the bullets and analyze the firearm evidence. Their findings were precise and damning. All fired rounds came from a single weapon, Matthew's handgun. Ballistics confirmed no other gun had discharged a bullet that night. Gunshot residue tests matched his hands and his clothing. And Kim's wound, close-range downward trajectory, indicated that the shooter was standing just feet away, outside the driver's door. There were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle. Her hands bore no defensive injuries. There were no fingerprints on the firearm except for Matthew's. To investigators, it told a straightforward story. He had fired at least 3 rounds, one striking Danny in the leg, another into the car, and one that killed his wife instantly. It wasn't premeditated in the traditional sense. There was no written plan, no waiting in ambush. But there was intent, the decision to bring a loaded gun to a volatile confrontation, and to use it when anger boiled over. When Danny was stable enough to speak, detectives visited him at the hospital. His recollection added another layer to the tragedy. He said Kim had contacted him earlier that evening. She was worried about Matt's behavior and wanted to talk. She told him she felt unsafe and planned to leave with her children. Danny claimed he told her not to come over, that it was too risky. But she insisted it would be quick, just a talk. Then, around 8:45 p.m., the SUV pulled into his driveway. From the window, he could see Matt shouting before the car had even stopped. When he stepped outside, he saw the glint of a gun in Matt's hand. She tried to calm him down, Danny told detectives. She said, "Matt, stop, just listen to me." And then there was a shot. That one statement, she said, "Matt, stop," would echo throughout the courtroom months later. It was the last thing Kim ever said. As word spread, the story drew attention beyond Ray Township. Local media covered every update. The arrest, the charges, the emerging picture of a marriage unraveling in public. Neighbors left flowers near the property. Friends organized vigils and fundraisers for the children now left without a mother. Reporters described the scene as a small town shaken to its core. But among those who knew the couple, the reactions were mixed. Some still defended Matt, saying he was a broken man pushed to the edge. Others saw him for what they believed he had become, a killer who couldn't control his jealousy. Even among law enforcement, there was an unspoken sadness about the case. One deputy said quietly to a reporter, "You see so many of these. Love, anger, and one bad decision. But when it's a couple you've known in the community, it hits different." On September 19, 2022, the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office formally charged Matthew Molicone with open murder, which allows a jury to decide between first or second degree, assault with intent to murder for the shooting of Danny, felony firearm. His bond was denied. Prosecutors argued he posed a danger and had shown an alarming lack of control. During his arraignment, Matt appeared visibly broken. He spoke softly, answering only "Yes, Your Honor," and "No, Your Honor." His attorney, Paul Cusick, entered a plea of not guilty, claiming the shooting was a tragic accident, not a deliberate act. But behind the scenes, the prosecution was confident. They had physical evidence, witness testimony, and forensic data, all pointing to one conclusion. This wasn't an accident. It was a crime born out of anger and obsession. Over the next year, prosecutors meticulously assembled their argument. They gathered cell phone records showing repeated calls and texts leading up to the confrontation. They subpoenaed surveillance footage from nearby roads showing Matt's vehicle driving to Danny's home that night, contradicting his claim that Kim had insisted on going. They even found an old search history on his phone, recorded weeks before the shooting. How long can you go to jail for shooting someone in self-defense? To the prosecution, it was evidence of premeditation. To the defense, it was proof of fear, a man researching his rights, not plotting a murder. But as trial approached, it became clear that this case wasn't going to hinge on data or ballistics. It was going to hinge on emotion, on how the jury interpreted the state of mind of a man who lost control of everything he cared about. Cusick told the court, Matthew Molicone loved his wife. He didn't go there that night to kill her. He went there to plead to reason. He made a reckless, terrible decision, but it was not a calculated one. He pointed to Matt's visible grief, the 911 call he made moments after the shooting, the fact that he stayed at the scene and tried to save her. In the defense's narrative, he was not a monster. He was a man who lost control in the most painful way imaginable. When it was his turn to speak, Matthew took the stand. The courtroom was silent as he began to describe, in halting sentences, the days leading up to that night. He said he and Kim had been trying to reconcile, that she'd been distant, and he feared she was seeing Danny again. He claimed he brought the gun because he was scared of Danny, not because he intended to use it. But when the prosecutor asked him why he aimed the gun at the car, why he fired through the open window, his voice cracked. "I don't know," he whispered. "I just snapped." It was a single sentence that carried the weight of a lifetime. The jury watched him cry, but they also watched the screen behind him, the images of Kim, forever frozen in the moments before her death. Emotion can move a jury, but evidence holds them. And the evidence spoke louder than his remorse. After 5 days of testimony and 2 full days of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. No one breathed as the foreperson stood and read the verdict aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Matthew Molicone, guilty of second-degree murder." A quiet sob broke from the gallery. Kim's family held hands tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Matthew sat motionless, staring at the floor. He didn't look at them. He didn't look at anyone. He was later sentenced to 25 to 40 years in prison, plus additional time for the firearm and assault charges. The judge called it a tragedy born out of anger and loss of control, adding that no sentence could undo what had been done. For Kim's family, justice came with a hollow echo. For Matt's, it came with unbearable sorrow, knowing that 2 lives had been destroyed, not just one. In Ray Township, The aftermath was quiet but heavy. The house where Kim and Matt once lived remained empty for months, a ghostly reminder of what was lost. Neighbors would sometimes drive by and slow down, glancing at the darkened windows. Kim's children were taken in by relatives. Her sister, speaking to local media, said softly, "We just want her remembered for her kindness, not for how she died." Danny eventually recovered physically, but those close to him said he was never the same. He moved away from Michigan not long after the trial ended, seeking to escape the memories of that night. In interviews, he rarely spoke of it except once when he said, "People think you heal from things like this. You don't. You just learn to live around the hole it leaves." Detective Elias, who had interviewed Matt that first night, later described the case as one that stayed with him. He told a reporter, "You see murders over money, revenge, even chance. But the ones that come from love, those stay with you, because you realize it's not just about hate. It's about pain that curdled into something deadly." The sheriff's office released a brief statement after sentencing. Domestic violence is not always visible. It often hides in silence, in excuses, in the spaces between love and fear. If you or someone you know is in danger, reach out. Don't wait until it's too late. That message resonated far beyond the small township. Community outreach programs began holding workshops and memorial events in Kim's honor, reminding residents that tragedy can begin quietly, with arguments, suspicion, or fear, before it ends in irreversible violence. In the end, what happened in Ray Township wasn't just the story of a crime. It was the story of how love, when mixed with anger and despair, can become something unrecognizable. Kimberly Molicone was 45 years old. She had plans, hopes, and dreams that ended in the passenger seat of a car, not because she was in the wrong place, but because she trusted someone she believed would never harm her. And Matthew Molicone, once a husband, a father, a neighbor, became the man who pulled the trigger that shattered not only her life, but his own and the lives of everyone around them. It's a sobering reminder that tragedy often hides in plain sight, that sometimes the people who seem most ordinary are carrying storms inside them no one else can see, and that one single moment, one decision made in anger, can turn love into loss forever.